Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I don't mean to scream at you. Oh my gosh. Good morning. Welcome to the Berks History Center. I'm Annie McCoy. I'm the executive director here. It is so wonderful to see this many people here. So thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate your support coming out to these events. I wanted to tell you about a couple more upcoming events that we have that you might be interested in. So on April 16th, we have a special program when the worker fight order brought the big Shoeless Joe and the Raja to play in Reading. That is at 6 p.m. and that talk is going to be given by Brian Engelhardt. April 18th, we have the Kentucky Derby hat basket weaving workshop. You can pre-register for that on our website. And then we also have on April 18th, we're going to be working in partnership with the Berks Heritage Council for Berks History Day. That's going to be over at the Berks County Heritage Center. So that where the red covered bridge and the big distal thing. So if you'd like to join us out there for the day, that is from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So without further ado, I know you guys are all waiting to hear this talk. I'd like to introduce Richard Adams. Richard is a retired attorney and family judge, an alumnus of Exeter Township High School, Princeton, and Yale, and a collaborator for decades with his older brother James Adams as they assembled a lifetime of research from which the book emerged. Richard and his wife Meryl live in Connecticut where they raised their two daughters. So welcome and thank you for watching.
Thank you very much. Now I don't have to introduce myself, but I think you probably know I wrote this little book. This is a book about Berks County. It's 500 pages, and I can't show you more than just a little bit of it today. So we'll think of a way to do that. It's about Pennsylvania Dutch Village, and this is the 250th anniversary of the Republic. So the theme is good. This is the way my dad and my uncles used to talk before they went to Penn State. And I promise not to talk this way very much anymore. So, frame 2 is the earliest photograph I have of the village of St. Lawrence. It was taken in 1903 from a farm off Hoop Lane on the eastern slope of Mount Penn that had belonged to my second great grandfather, William Autumn. On the right, if you're local, you will recognize Neversink Mountain. And that, of course, frames East Reading and Mount Penn on the south. And on the left is Goulden Hill, and the village lies in the Antietam Valley between them. So on the right, that's kind of the base of the dark part of the mountain, runs Perkiomen Avenue, which goes around the mountain and down toward Philadelphia. But Perkiomen Avenue also intersects a very important road. I don't know if I can get this up there. Up in the right-hand corner, up in there, those little white dots are buildings at the intersection of what's now called Oley Turnpike Road. And that was the location for 200 years of the Black Bear Inn Tavern Hotel, depending on what era. And if you follow those little white flecks down the hill, that's Black Bear Hill. And you reach Antietam Creek, kind of where the tips of the trees are. And from there, the road bends to the right. And that is the road I call the Old Road. It's, as I said, officially the Oley Turnpike Road. I'll explain that in a minute. It goes up the slope to the plane on which the rest of the road travels and continues through the village, away from the camera, and down into the Oley Valley in the distance among those hills. Go back to the bridge at the creek, and a left turn puts you on a road that goes at the base of the mountain of Goulden Hill. It's called Brumbach Street. and it goes off to the left of Butter Lane. This is the little house on Spook Lane from which that photograph was taken and where my second great-grandfather and great-grandfather had lived. This is a map of the same area viewed from the south. The house on Spook Lane is marked in the upper left by two cons with a circle around it. St. Lawrence, of course, is in the center, Penn to the left, Jackalot to the right, and Rifton on the bottom, and Pennside and Stony Creek Mills toward the top. This is a map drawn by my uncle Charles S. Adams, who was, among other things, a county commissioner. He drew it in 1965 to present the village as it was in 1900, with dirt streets and 7 farms around it. Berks County at that time had 6,000 farms. The eventual borough covers slightly under 1 square mile. Yes, you came to a program about 1 square mile in Berks County. Frame 6 is the aerial photograph of the village in the 21st century, facing east toward the Ole Valley. Antietam Creek, you can sort of see down here in the lower right. And the old road or the turnpike veering up the hill into the center of the village. And where it passes the old well-known buildings of the village, the 1924 Community Hall is up the top of the hill. Currently not in much use. And then as you go down St. Lawrence Avenue toward the Ole Valley, you pass the John F. Lutz Furniture Building, which is now apartments. And then up here, curving down on the left, is a state highway built in 1927, now St. Lawrence Avenue, which did not exist for most of the time of the period that we're talking about. This is a map of the county, circling the townships and municipalities where the stories take place, especially Exeter, Ole, Alsace, and Emmett and townships. That's where the first Europeans settled in the 18th century, and they were in the boonies, the unincorporated, thinly populated, far western reaches of what was then Philadelphia County, as it was originally laid out by William Penn. Most of the settlers came from the Rhine Valley. There were French Protestant Huguenots who fled east into the Rhine Valley to escape Louis XVI, and German-speaking Lutherans and Reformed Church members. They traveled to America from all parts of the valley, from Switzerland down here on the bottom, north to the Netherlands, and everywhere in between. And from there, took to Dutch ports, departing from Rotterdam or Amsterdam with a stopover on the east coast of England. And then across the North Atlantic, vessels like these. This is the Molly, categorized as a snow for its sail arrangement. These were small vessels which sailed over and over year after year, back and forth, England to Philadelphia and back again, in remarkable numbers, bringing thousands of Rhine immigrants to Penn's Woods. Some were indentured to their captains as redemptioners, legally selling their years of labor at auction in Philadelphia to local businesses and residents, of course, postponing the day when they could seek their goal of qualifying for their own land and have freedom to make their own way in the new world. And it was really remote where they were. This is an excerpt from a study, thank you. A study of the formation of Pennsylvania counties. If you focus on the second map, then here. That shows the first three counties along the Delaware. Bucks shown in gray, Chester in pink, Philadelphia in a sort of purple. The people we are discussing first showed up in the Ole Valley in 1704, the Swedes, who were offered land by William Penn to compensate them for being driven from Delaware by the Dutch and the English. The Ole Exeter Quaker meeting was established by the Gwynedd meeting in 1720. And my paternal grandmother's family, the Schneiders, arrived in Ole in 1717. So they were all settled in the farthest western part of Philadelphia County with no local government. The closest was Germantown, and the roads were few. Amity Township afforded the first local government when it was erected in 1719. Boundaries were indefinite, so people around there had to rely on Amity until Ole and Exeter were approved in the 1740s. Reading was erected as a village in 1748, but Berks County was not created until 1752. So those early townships were all original Philadelphia County townships. The next county to be created, or erected as they say, was Lancaster in 1729. Oops. And that is number 4 on the map at the top, right there. A huge county, occupying everything along the right or south bank of the Schuylkill River above Chester County. And in the meantime, Philadelphia County was extended. See how it's larger now than it was over here. It's extended farther northwest to about its present northwest limits, but only along the north bank of the Schuylkill River. When Berks County was carved from Philadelphia and Chester and Lancaster counties in 1752, was number 7 over here, the gray one. It was extended all the way to the Wyoming Valley at Hazleton. So Amity Township and the area we've been discussing at this point are now at a boundary that is now Montgomery County, but was then Chester County right here. These early settlers moved into the Ole Valley. This is an excerpt from Philip Pendleton's book on the Ole Valley in the colonial era. We can see it is drained by three creeks. The Antietam, the Monocacy, and the Mononotawny is the long one over here. The Ole Valley itself is defined by this system as the hills around it, giving at least the northern part of it the Indian name of Olink or Ole. This makes it clear that St. Lawrence is sort of a cork in the bottle at the western end of the Ole Valley between those two hills. What is distinctive to the settlement of the area and of historical importance is the ancient road that crosses it, shown here in frame 13. Prior to European settlement, it was already the main path of indigenous people across the entire area. The black line, as you can see, starts at the river on the left. I call it the old road because it is really old. It runs from where it crosses the Schuylkill River at Reading, up Penn Street, up Brigham Avenue, down through Mount Penn, and then through St. Lawrence, down to Stonersville, Weavertown, Amity, and back to the coast, back to the river at Douglasville, which was then Malotton, and from there along the river to Germantown and Philadelphia. This is a map of the network of Indian trails between the Susquehanna and Delaware rivers. On the left of their label. They intersected at a hub called Weiser's, and that's now Womelsdorf, which was the home and headquarters of Conrad Weiser, the famous Indian agent. He was an interpreter who knew the Indian languages, having lived with them in New York for the New York trial. He interpreted and negotiated between the Lenape and the Pennsylvania governors at Philadelphia at their frequent meetings. The primary indigenous villages were further up the Tulpehocken to the left. The Tulpehocken Trail leading to Shamokin, the Wyoming Valley and beyond. Now Shamokin is now Sunbury, and the town named Shamokin is something else to the east. So the Indians traveled on foot, having neither the horse nor the wheel, back and forth from there to Philadelphia through the future location of St. Lawrence along what they call the Old Road, and that's why I call it that. William Penn, as well as Benjamin Franklin, Conrad Weiser, and the other notables who traveled that road would have known it as the Tulpehocken Road. As after Penn had it laid out in 1687 from Philadelphia. The map also shows a trail from Weiser's to Harris Ferry on the left, which of course became Harrisburg, then one to Ephrata and Lancaster on the south, and to Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Easton on the east. The old road had another function, of which I only gradually became aware, which could explain why it exists. It was the location of important stone quarries relied upon by Eastern Indian tribes for thousands of years. I'm told it was for a hard, dark-colored quartz, considered the finest material for hand-making sharp-edged tools and heavy stone tools. I have seen examples. Its use dates back as much as 10,000 to 15,000 years. If so, this is a really old road. This is Edward Hicks, Peaceable Kingdom, reminding us that Penn's treaties with the Indians and his philosophy of accepting all religions brought many Europeans and Germans to Pennsylvania. Including one of those people who was Isaac Levan. This picture is of a late 18th century home which stands today amid a modern neighborhood in St. Lawrence on land originally occupied by his 1,000-acre farm, making Isaac the first European settler actually on land to become St. Lawrence. Isaac and his brothers arrived in Philadelphia in 1717, and he acquired his land in 1730. His family assembled parcels shown on this handmade map. Which totaled 3,000 acres, reaching across the old road, the upper right, across the Antietam, across present-day Rifton, and all the way to the Schuylkill River. Their ancestors have continued to live in and around the village of St. Lawrence up to the present day. Ken and Grace Levan are here with us somewhere. Though they did move a slightly bit away into an eastern part of Exeter, most of the Quaker meeting. The early Levans also had been really on the fringe of settlement beyond organized government until Philadelphia County was expanded, as you have seen, further northwest, right around the time Isaac started farming in the Antietam. After 40 years of farming in 1770, Isaac and his wife, Mary Margaret Kirst, moved to a home in Reading, where he had been a major player from the very first opportunity, having bought 2 of the first 7 lots sold there by the Penn brothers in 1751. Conrad Weiser, in the meanwhile, lot 3. This is the map of early Reading drawn by a Hessian prisoner of war in 1780, showing the layout of these lots. The map is oriented to the east, so the north is to the left. Levan and Weiser were both trustees of the First Reformed Church of Reading, established in 1753, which I believe is still active, right? And Isaac was one of the 8 trustees of the first free bilingual school in 1755. Tensions with German-speaking parents arose, however, about the intentions of the school's English sponsors to undermine German culture and language, which doubts were encouraged by Christopher Sauer in his Germantown German language newspaper, which was widely read among German-speaking communities. Those doubts led to German students being withdrawn, despite efforts by Benjamin Franklin and Conrad Weiser to reassure the parents, though Franklin himself had been known to express anxiety that the growing German-speaking population might displace the use of English. Isaac also established a mill on Rose Creek, which flowed from East Reading and empties into the Schuylkill at the end of what is now South 6th Street. And he became a county commissioner after Reading became a county seat in 1752. He obviously knew Conrad Weiser well, and almost had to have known Benjamin Franklin, given his multiple visits to tiny little Reading. Uncle Charlie's map here again illustrates St. Lawrence being surrounded by 7 working farms in the open spaces, several mills, and a rendering plant along the Antietam. The mills were major sources of growth, starting with a sawmill before 1775 and followed by others along the Antietam Creek. The arrival of water industry was the major shot of growth that brought commerce and population to that little river crossing on the old road. Excuse me. The Antietam itself, small as it looks, provided enough water and elevation for dams to create sufficient head to power the early mills. This is a detail from a larger 1836 map, courtesy of the Misers, locating 17 mills along the creek. Grist mills, paper mills, sawmills, tilt hammer mills, a cider mill, a vegetable oil mill, carding and fulling mills, and forges. Over the next century, portrayed in this hand-drawn map, there would be 23 industrial activities by 35 owners on 10 sites, just along the 2-mile stretch within the eventual border of St. Lawrence. Of course, still more upstream. This portrays the crowded look of a map of the area in 1876. But as water power was replaced by steam and electricity and industries scaled up, many sites were abandoned. However, the mill of the Rombach family, including those of George Washington Rombach and Thomas Jefferson Rombach, had been growing and consolidating woolen goods operations on 2 sites, which grew and operated well into the 20th century, providing employment to much of the growing village population and lending their resources and leadership to the community. As of the 1940 census, more than a quarter of the employed population of the village still worked in the mills. This is the old mill, so-called. As of 1956, when woolen manufacturing had ended. Today it's unoccupied and has an undefined future. This is what was called the new mill, variously occupied by Bach Brothers Exeter Woolen Mill and the succeeding St. Lawrence Woolen Mill Company, but subsequently converted to other operations in the 1950s and still in active use today. This revives a view of the Griesemer Mill, which stood a few hundred feet west of the new mill. It was, like so many beautiful old mills located along busy roads, demolished by dynamiting, this one in 1920. Though the Griesemer farmhouse still stands across the street, where I think the 18th century Durst Tavern stood and may already be within that building. Now, from here I'm going to focus more on a central character of this St. Lawrence story, Albert H. Adams. He added the S to the Autumn family name many years later. He was born in 1859, 2 years before the outbreak of the American Civil War, near a village even smaller than St. Lawrence called Basket, in the home of his maternal grandparents, which then stood next to Speece Church. Albert was heir to a heritage of farming and working for yourself. His father, Israel Adams, and his mother, Susanna, there they are, were born and raised in Alsace Township, which rolls across the eastern slope of Mount Penn in steep valleys and gullies, as you can see on that, where one farmhouse may not even see to the next, hidden by a hill. It must have been challenging soil when the German settlers arrived in the early 18th century, but they built the soil with contour farming, good soil practices, and lots of animal manure. It is beautiful country, much of it still being farmed. His grandfather, William Autumn, that is Albert's, and Wilhelm Autumn, his great-grandfather, had been there since Wilhelm and Catalina, which usually gets translated Catherine, Catalina Garrett, were married by the Reverend Booth in 1793. They both had large families and many disappointments, as childbirth was still a hazardous venture for mothers and children. It was a tragic and seemingly unavoidable part of life. In 1881, Albert set his sights on a dream of having a business of his own, to have a dairy farm and to sell his own milk retail to the growing population of the highly industrialized city of Reading, center of the Reading Railroad, location of its main locomotive and repair shops, and home to many industries from steel and paint to hats, cigars, and candy, and with rows and rows of red brick houses. But he and his father, Israel, lacked the funds to stake him. So this is the earliest picture I have of him at age 23 in 1882, somewhat pugnacious looking, maybe, I don't know. Albert launched his project. It required animals and equipment. He earned the required capital by working from 1882 to 1886 at the Pine Forge and Glendale Iron Works, a several-mile walk from his father's rented farm in Amity Township. This is what he worked, whatever shifts he could get, and I'm sure he earned the trust of his employers. That man could work. All his life he worked, wherever he could earn an honest buck. And at Pine Forge, he worked at firing and heating, which sounds like the most uncomfortable and dangerous, but maybe better paying jobs. He seems to have saved every nickel and over the 4 years accumulated $2,200. That's the equivalent of almost $75,000 today. There was no state or federal income tax, no FICA or Social Security deduction. If you made $1, you decided what to do with it, and you lived with the consequences of your decision. He quit working at the rolling mill in May, according to 1886, according to his journal that he had kept since age 13, and set about buying everything he needed: cows, tools, materials, milking equipment, with many, many pages of items in the ledger. And by April 1887, he has moved in, set up, and is selling milk and butter from his own animals on the adjoining Rendon farm. In his first year, he produced almost 5,000 gallons of milk, and daily he hauled the big cans to the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad Station at Douglasville, as shown here. That's a pretty neat little 440 Atlantic type locomotive there, being fueled and doing the call. Anyway, it had to be shipped from there to Reading and handled by intermediaries, each who took their cut, whether he sold the milk outright at the station to these agents, or whether he shipped it at his own expense, as he obviously often did, and sold it to someone else in Reading. It was still too far and too expensive. He needed a farm he could work himself, and to be close enough to his customers to deliver it himself and cut out the middlemen. So I should pause now, though, and tell you about one of the best things that could have ever happened to Albert. You could probably guess. He was living with his parents and siblings at the Brenizer farm. Here's the Brenizer farm. It's a beautiful place with a magnificent stone barn behind the camera. Across the street, a hired girl, Deborah Schneider, was living with her older cousin's household and chores, gardening, and children, the common arrangement of the time. Deborah was a third great-granddaughter of Hans Schneider, the earliest settler of the Holy Valley, whose company brought a family to St. Lawrence, said to be one of the original Huguenots who settled the Holy Valley. This is a picture of a later 18th century homestead that you can still see driving down the Ole Turnpike Road. Deborah was born in 1861 on a house next to the Snyder Mill. This is the view of the Snyder Mill, also a well-known historic site that you can still see on a drive in the country. The original mill is beautifully restored by the family who owns it. These are the earliest likenesses I have of her as a toddler on the left, and then age 4 upon the occasion of her mother's death in 1865 on the right. Obviously, Deborah and Al got to know each other pretty well, because in April 1881, they married at the home of the Reformed minister of both local churches, H.S. Leinbach, in Reading, with Reverend Leinbach as the only witness. Deborah gave birth to their first child, William, in October. But by then, Israel had moved them all to the Van Reed farm in Amity Township near Earlville on the Boyertown Road, where Albert launched his dairy farm just described. Sadly, Deborah and Albert's love child survived only 2 months. Albert wrote a poem in his ledger to commemorate the loss of their little Willie. Deborah bore 3 more children at what I call Fancy Hill, a girl and 2 boys who did survive. Albert's mother, Susanna, died in 1888, and in the late winter of that same year, Albert and Deborah moved back to the Brenizer farm, much closer to Reading, where, of course, where they had lived and when they met, and just in time for the Great Blizzard of 1888. Now, once they dug out, they started delivering milk by horse cart to Reading in tall steel cans like the ones you saw at the train station, labeling the milk by hand to each customer into her container, whatever that might be. My father was amused to think back from his days of delivering about how the customer might first dump the change to buy the milk out of her container and then hand it to him to fill with milk. This is Albert proudly displaying his 2-horse milk wagon, capable of making the daily 2-way trip and working the hills of Reading. Eldest son Warren joining the picture in the lower left, no doubt at Albert's suggestion. 5 more boys were born at the Brennheiser, and the farm and business operated there from 1888 to 1899. But it was still too far to travel every day, though they did it. And there were 2 tolls each way, at Jackson Wall on the Woolly Turnpike Road and on the Perkiomen Turnpike at the Reading City line. And then there was rent, which earned him no equity. He needed a farm of his own and to be closer to Reading. A little farm he had passed both ways every day attracted his attention in 1897. He eventually made the winning bid in 1898 and bought what I'm calling the Dinkle Farm in St. Lawrence, so prior owner. This shows all 8 children at that point dressed up for the holidays in 1898 on the eve of their move to St. Lawrence. And here is Albert's Green, the farm itself. A picture taken from the house facing the Griesler Mill on the left and the creek beyond it. The milk house is the little white building. That would be replaced and the garden would shrink to make way. This is a view of farm buildings to the right of the barn, the creamery on the left, built around 1912 and later used for bottling and pasteurizing. The old homestead over the cold storage in the center, sort of in shadow, and the house, which is actually smaller than the Brennheiser house was for a bigger family. Today, only the houses in cold storage remain and unfortunately derelict. This is the barn after Albert had painted the name of his business over the hex signs. I guess he wasn't too worried about offending the spirits. This is a little fleet of wagons and a glass bottle, which Albert introduced into his operation in 1913. An innovation which helped to run the Dipper milk cellars off the street. Bottling combined with cooling offered sanitation from the cow to you. Road dirt and soil containers were gone, a thing of the past. Here, a milk wagon on the left testifies to son Warren having returned from college and graduate school to join as a partner in the business. H. Adams' son, you can almost see. And an early truck, likely used for commercial routes with long distances between customers. That's a signal, I don't know. Well, here is Albert using an early bottle, filling them with warm pasteurized milk. And parts of the early pasteurizer can be seen on the wall in the background. With pasteurizing added, this was the third strike for those selling raw milk who could just no longer compete. And a milk bottle, which documents the merger of the St. Lawrence Dairy Farm and the Antietam Dairies, owned by a wealthy Reading industrialist, D. Wellington Dietrich. This was operated first as the St. Lawrence Antietam Dairies, as I think you can read on the embossed bottle. then later as the St. Lawrence Dairy Company and Corporation. The bottle, by the way, was found and given to me by my son-in-law, David Prue. He had no idea how rare that gift was. That is the only one I've yet to find of the St. Lawrence Antietam Dairy. So if you got one, let me know. This is the Israel Adams Farm family in 1908. Israel is in the center of the front row, of course. 5 of the 7 of them having moved to St. Lawrence since 1899. So they were there in full swing by 1900. Albert with his dairy farm and his 2 brothers standing in the upper left, Billy and Charles, have created a new grocery store, which turned into a general store, and which eventually the post office, and which still stands. And here's the whole family as of 1912, all 11 children who survived infancy, 8 boys and 3 girls out of 15 childbirths. So to fast forward at this point, Warren left the business against his father's wishes to join the YMC work supplying R&R for American World War I troops near the front in France. Albert fell ill and died in 1918 of pneumonia secondary to the flu, not the Spanish flu, just the regular one, bad enough. Warren returned from France and took over the business, and with a new investor, Mr. Dietrich, the dairy moved from the farm on St. Lawrence to Reading at 9th and Bingham Streets, opening for business there in January 1921. Here is the headquarters of the St. Lawrence Dairy at 9th and Bingham, where they remained from 1921 to 1959. Anybody remember these still? Well, you're 65 years ago, so it's okay if you don't. This photo was probably taken during the 50th anniversary celebrations in 1938, with about 75 employees lined up for a group photo, and the 3 brothers, my dad and uncles, featured in single photos above. Uncle Warren, oh, that's not this picture. There we go. That's the picture I'm supposed to have up there. They're the 75 employees and the 3 brothers. Uncle Warren in the center, the president, my dad, general manager on the left, and Uncle Israel was the plant manager. This picture was probably taken during the 50th anniversary celebrations in 1938, with about 75 employees lined up. At that point, the St. Lawrence Dairy had become and long remained the largest dairy in Berks County. Now, this is out of order, is the same building built in probably in 1940 when they completed motorizing the fleet and replacing all the horses and wagons. Those trucks are international harvesters, if you're curious. So every day, milk delivery trucks from the farms arrive while home delivery milk trucks and larger wholesale trucks departed, coming and going all day. You can see here on the roof, an assembly room had been added where the home economist experimented with recipes, and thousands of school children gathered following their school tours for a movie and ice cream. You ever go on one of those? No, you don't remember the plant, you didn't go. This, of course, displays post-war Reading in its heyday, which were also the dairy's heydays. You see where we are above the 5th Street traffic circle with the Christmas tree in the center, looking up the Penn Square to 6th Street and up Penn Street to 7th, 8th, and 9th, and so on. Pomeroy's and 5 and Dimes are clearly visible on the right, and not quite discernible on the left is the St. Lawrence Dairy Luncheonette. The dairy was now in the ice cream and restaurant business. This shows the front entrance and the revolving door into the luncheonette. Got to be some people here my age remember that. In fact, I know there was one. The next picture in this frame is of the Reading Bicentennial Parade in 1948, with the luncheonette in the upper center next to a growing crystal restaurant. Too much noise. Next door. This is a night view with the St. Lawrence Dairy on the left with multicolored neon lights and the full-sized crystal sign across the entire frontage, as more of you may remember it. Here's the interior of the dairy restaurant, familiar to many Readingites. This is the picture taken in the opposite direction in the same room during a Christmas party, revealing one of the beautiful, colorful Cowcaster murals. And on the right, a mural of a horse-drawn coach arriving in an English town of long ago on its way to London. And below that is the Old English Room, used for extra busy days, special events, civic club meetings, and the radio broadcast of a morning Arthur Godfrey type breakfast show called Breakfast in Berks. And I see some nodding. That's featuring a popular local character called Professor Schnitzel. Okay, you know Professor Schnitzel. You do remember him, red wig and Pennsylvania Dutch costume. Hi there, this is Professor Schnitzel talking at you. See, remember that? He performed at the Reading Fair and events over the county, often in Pennsylvania Dutch, in order to code the off-color jokes that he liked to tell. But the most prominent symbol of the St. Lawrence Dairy throughout the county were the residential milk trucks, delivering in every village and neighborhood in Reading and Berks every day. By 1960, there were 60 home delivery routes, and by around that time, 25,000 regular home delivery sites. This is a GMC one-step milk truck. That's one step in and one step out. That's Eugene Swavely carrying the milk, one of 3 St. Lawrence brothers who spent their careers with the St. Lawrence Dairy. One of the sons, at least, is here. One step saved knees, ankles, and backs from thousands of trips back and forth between the truck and the customer carrying heavy milk bottles. But even so, it remained a tough job. This is my cousin Bill Leinbach, one of my Aunt Katie's 12, standing in the door of his Divco milk truck. The design that came to be considered the American milk truck in the 1940s and 50s. Frame 60 features 2 particularly well-known St. Lawrence milkmen. On the left is Milt Gutschall, a St. Lawrence resident, appearing in the Reading papers on the day of his retirement from his daily route in Hampton Heights, receiving a party given by grateful customers and gifts as thank you for his many years of faithful service. He then went and worked in the plant until retirement to save further wear and tear on his joints. He had been with the company since 1918 on the farm in St. Lawrence. His 2 sons also worked their entire careers at the St. Lawrence Dairy. On the right is a company legend, my first cousin, George Adams Leinbach, another of Katie's. He developed what I believe was the largest route covering St. Lawrence and the fast-growing Reichten areas. He was loved by his customers for his reliability and friendliness, and known for his whistling from house to house and across backyards. Of course, his whistling was something else. It was far beyond anything that I could do. And yet, he had a much greater reputation than Whistler. As a professional tenor, this frame reveals him with the Reading Civic Opera Company, singing love songs with his wife-to-be, Margaret Whalen, in a performance of Gilbert Sullivan's Gondoliers. As he said, he made his living as a milkman, but his career was singing. As you might be catching on, employees seem to stay with the St. Lawrence Dairy for many years, often their entire working years, in the plant, in the office, and on the road. 3 or more from the same family was common. After World War II, a club was formed with George Leinbach as its first president for those with 25 or more years with the St. Lawrence, going back to 1916. By 1959, there were 38 living members, quarter of the workforce at that time. The company was for many like their home and a family, and they felt a personal stake in its success and pride in its products. There were teams and clubs, special trips and dinners, and huge annual company picnics at a variety of places. The only picnic photo I have is of 1926, and it is so big that I've had to have it made into 4 sections to fit on 4 separate pages in the book. This is the biggest shindig the dairy ever threw, the 50th anniversary dinner for 550 guests at the Berkshire Hotel. And after the war, a dinner at the Reading Country Club in honor of the 44 dairy employees who served in World War II, in every service and every theater of the war, with the loss of 2 of them. That's a story to itself. The St. Lawrence Dairy was sold to the Kaufman family, who owned and operated the Keystone Dairy in Muhlenberg Township in 1959. They moved plant operations to their site on Cleveland Avenue in what was called Dairy Row, and operated under the St. Lawrence name until 1979, when they sold out to Clover Farms, which surely you know about, who continued with many of the same employees until the end of the home delivery in 1988. Just 100 years from Albert's first horse-drawn wagon trip to Reading. So, where did all this come from? How did the largest dairy in the county arise from the efforts of a Pennsylvania Dutchman with a 5th grade education and his sons to create the largest dairy in Berks, supporting hundreds of families? The answer lies in the story of Albert's other dream that he made come true, the education of his children, 8 boys and a daughter. Those are supposed to be out of there. Unfortunately, there we go. This is the boys in 1917. 2 in World War I uniforms. Youngest, eldest to youngest, left to right, Warren, Harvey, Charles, Daniel, Ralph, Israel, Albert, and John Quincy. By 1898, the Berks County had a publicly financed school system, consisting largely of one-room schools spread across the township, so no student had to walk more than 1.5 miles to get to one of them. When Albert bought the farm in St. Lawrence in 1898, he was elected to the Exeter's 6-member school board, determined to build an 8th grade school in the middle of St. Lawrence, where most could walk to school but have a better education. He got authority from the board to bid for and buy 2 lots on the Ole Turnpike Road in the developing center near the A.J. Brombach Woolen Mill and across from Lutz's Furniture, Undertaker, and POS of a Lodge Home. He wanted a 4-room building on 2 floors. And he had the votes to build a school, but there were votes only for 2 rooms. So he managed to get the 4 votes for 2 rooms vertically. So it could be expanded by a mirror image horizontally, as shown in these pictures on the right. As the student numbers grew, the other 2 rooms plus new stairs and a basement bathrooms were added. I attended that school, as did some of you in this room. Then providing 4 grades, finally 1 grade to a room. So having accomplished that, that meant all of Al's children could have a publicly financed 8-year education, and they all did. But that wasn't anywhere near the end of his plan. He wanted them all to go to high school, 12 full grades. But there was no public high school available to Exeter students. You had to pay your own way. How would a small dairy farmer do that for all his children? Well, there was a way. Because teachers for the rapidly growing public schools were in short supply. And so the law allowed an 8th grade graduate in good standing to apply for a provisional teaching certificate, supervised each year by the county superintendent to teach in 1-room schools. So all of the Adams boys were expected to become teachers and use their salaries to pay for high school for each of them. If you survived evaluation by the county superintendent 4 years in a row, you earned a permanent certificate. Albert's kids would work during the 2 semesters when public schools, which operated only 3 or 4 months a year, were closed. They would bootstrap their own secondary educations, and Albert was the treasurer. But where'd he go?
Right.
Okay, we'll go here. There were only a limited number of available schools, and they all charged tuition. Albert had his eye on a school, go back to Ralph, had an eye on a school out of the county, which would require some travel that must have seemed perfect to him. Here's my dad's temporary certificate the first year. This is dated in 1909. So it started in 08 at age 17, your schoolmaster. So Albert had an eye on a school out of the county. Seemed perfect to him. Perkiomen Seminary in Pennsburg in Montgomery County. Resurrected by Dr. Oscar Kriebel, a highly educated Springfelder minister, graduate of Oberlin and the University of Berlin, who had recruited a superb faculty, graduates of some of the best colleges in the mid-Atlantic states. All 8 of his boys went to Perkiomen, 1 or 2 at a time, each working to support each other. And they all worked at Perk, some as coaches in the library, kitchen offices. Here's Uncle Warren as they were having a good time here as the captain of the football team. And on the right, Uncle Ralph as captain of the football team in the center of the front row. But here's my dad as a waiter, second from the right in the front row, which was a job in which he worked every semester in which he was at Perkiomen. So, any event, even graduating from Perkiomen wasn't all that he had in mind. He had a 5th grade education. He wanted his boys to graduate from college. Warren went to the University of Pennsylvania, but the other 5 boys and their sister Hannah went to Penn State. But how could they teach school and go to state? It wasn't set up to give them the public school year off. This is the answer. They ran boarding houses for Penn State students between 1908 and 1923. actually 2 in succession. My dad ran the one on West College Avenue, is it working now? For 3 years by himself, from 1914 to 1917. Then there was a gap of Adams boys until 1919, when the last 2 arrived after World War I. Israel graduated valedictorian of his class in 1923. And here's their business card. Our only rival, mother. Good wholesome food. The club closed when the last boy graduated, and Hannah was allowed to finish her last 2 years in peace as the first woman in her family to ever graduate from college. So, of course, there are 7, so the result was that 7 of Albert's 11 children graduated from college by 1925. And there are many other stories we don't have really time for. This was the Shriners record, which killed a large number of people in Berks County and 4 in St. Lawrence. And that's the tornado. That's the Brumbach Adams, yeah, the Brumbach Mill homes. And that swept across the village. So you can read the book. So we're out of time. So it could be said that this is Albert's work in 1917, his last full year of life, with Dr. Kriebel and his daughters present, with Deborah and Albert and their children and their early crop of grandchildren, and including the 2 sons, Ralph and Israel, who would marry 2 of Dr. Kriebel's daughters after the war to make the merger of their families permanent. And finally, a quiet picture of the old guard and the new guard along the brand new tracks of the Ole Valley Railroad in 1902. George Washington Brumbach, one of the mill owners whose family arrived in 1830, sits on the left, having already lost 2 of his 3 daughters to tuberculosis in recent years, and just 5 years before the dissolution of his business partnership upon the unexpected death of his brother Thomas Jefferson Brumbach in the Honda wreck. Next to him sits Albert Adams, 3 years after moving in with his family to his St. Lawrence dairy farm, who looks straight ahead, dreaming, as always, of the future. So,
does anybody have any questions for Richard?
yeah.
No questions.
Well, there's one story, if somebody wants it, of the Jackie Gleason story, but let's take this question further. Can you repeat that?
Happened to the building at 9th and Bingham.
What?
The building at 9th and Bingham.
Oh, I'm the biggest. Well, when they sold,
Repeat questions.
right, what happened to the building at 9th and Bingham? When it was sold to the new buyers in Muhlenberg Township, the building was sold and demolished. I have pictures of that, I don't care to look at them. It's a gas station now, or was.
A beer distributor.
It's a beer distributor.
Oh, okay, all right, beer distributor.
And around 1963, I worked at the St. Lawrence Luncheonette. What I remember most is the distance of the entrance to the kitchen. Where you had to go get the food for the patients there.
You worked better than Deb.
And I just remember the names of the family with the family.
Oh, the Hartsville.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
They took over.
I forgot.
They took over in 1954.
So that was one of my early wait staff experiences.
That didn't last very long. It lasted about
If we could have a round of applause.